Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I hope everyone is doing okay today. I have an awesome guest with me today. I have Constance Gadell-Newton with me. She's running for the governor of Ohio for the Green Party. Constance, please tell the audience hello.
Thank you, Jamal. It's great to be on your show.
Great to have you, man. It's absolutely great to have you. So let me check the audio. I just want to make sure people can hear me okay.
Okay.
Good. Excellent. So first, just a basic question. How did you get into politics? I mean, I'm, you're an attorney at law, but what was the bug that bit you that got you into being interested in politics?
Well, I got into politics shortly after law school. So I just started working with the Green Party on voter protection and voter rights. And in 2008, we wanted to make sure that everybody had the opportunity to vote in Ohio, and particularly Central Ohio. There had been a lot of voter anomalies in 2004 and in 2000 that we wanted to protect against. So that's really when I got involved with the Green Party.
So what with the anomalies? You just well, just because they're anomalies, though, that wouldn't necessarily push you directly to politics, would it? I mean, was that it? That was the propulsion. That was the thing that said that piqued your interest. Let's say it that way. That was the thing that piqued your interest that got you into the political space.
Yeah, I actually ended up working with one of the lawyers who worked on the Bush v. Gore issue, Bob Fitrakis.
No way.
Party person. And I started working with him doing legal work for the Green Party, getting Cynthia McKinney on the ballot and kicking off our party status. So I was really involved as one of the founding mothers of the Green Party since 2008, just because of my legal work and trying to organize to make sure that that election went smoothly and that we could try to prevent any election fraud that might happen in 2008, since there was so much going on in 2000 and 2004. And the man who ended up becoming my law partner and mentor for many years, he was one of the attorneys who worked on Bush v. Gore and did a lot of reporting on that issue.
That is fascinating. I remember when John Kerry was running in Ohio, there were anomalies in the voting. From my understanding, there were anomalies in the voting during that time period also. So
yes,
I can totally understand how that would get somebody interested into the political process. What were you doing to stop, or to, you could say, protect the political process during 2008? What was the thing that your law firm was doing to try to prevent the anomalies that you guys saw in 2000 and 2004?
Yes, I had just graduated from law school, so I was not an attorney yet, but I helped write the legal filing that got Cynthia McKinney on the ballot. And then because we had party standing, we were allowed to appoint election observers. So we're allowed to appoint observers from the party to go in and watch the voter canvass and how voters were being treated as they went to vote. And then I was an attorney on call who responded when there were issues, if people weren't able to vote for some reason, people were calling in to us. We also organized the exit polls in Columbus. So I worked on that effort as well. So exit polling is a major way that we verify elections. As people are exiting the polls, if we ask them who they voted for, that's one of the most accurate ways to reflect what the actual vote would have been and to protect the vote.
Essentially, the person just put their vote, they come out, they say, I voted for this person, and you can kind of do a percentage or probability of sorts to saying, how does the probability line up with the actual tally? I mean, that's basically what it boils down to.
Right. It's a scientific polling method. So.
Now, what about so I'm curious about this. So what do you think? What is your appraisal of the electoral system? I know for the most part you're specific to Ohio, but going after 2008, let's say 2012 and 2016 and so on, what was your appraisal of the electoral system, I guess, in Ohio? I'm gonna leave the question open in that sense.
Well, I think it's pretty corrupt. I think that we continue to have voter suppression, and that the policies of the Secretary of State, who actually happens to be one of my opponents, he's running for lieutenant governor, Secretary of State John Husted, his policies have acted to suppress the voter turnout. And one thing that he's done as Secretary of State is send a mailer out to voters warning them that if they don't vote within 2 election cycles, they'll actually be purged from the voter rolls. So another election integrity activity that I've done through the years is requesting the public records from all of our 88 county boards of elections to see how many purge voters they have and what types of purge voters. So in the period right before 2008, there was over 1.5 million purge voter records that I turned up in my public records request, and similar numbers in 2012. So some of those may have been legitimate if people died or moved, but a lot of those were the people who were removed simply because they had not voted within the past 2 election cycles. So one thing that we try to promote is automatic voter registration when someone turns 18, or voter registration through the BMV. So we want people to be able to vote. We want it to be more of an automatic process. And I would say that currently only about 1/3 of adults who are eligible to vote actually vote in a given election. So that means that the people who are choosing our elected officials is a really small percentage of the population. So as a Green, I do want to give voters an additional choice, an additional incentive to vote for a candidate that they might want to vote for.
Why do you think, well, 2 things. God, I love this conversation already. So consequences. One of the things I look at when I look at our political system, and I look at even the legal framework or the legal system itself, it seems like there are very little consequences for bad behavior. So you have a purge of, what would you say, 500,000 voters. And even if you can make a case that says some of these people died, that's 500,000 people that you've purged off the voting rolls.
1.5 million. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. 1.5 million. That's even worse.
Yeah.
So,
that's a lot.
Even if you can say, even if you can show, because look, let's be honest, the Republican Party and even the Democratic Party during the prior primary were engaged in voter suppression for people who they didn't necessarily want on the voter rolls because they didn't want them voting against their candidate. These policies, particularly in Republican states, have been used to try to suppress the vote because they have a better chance of winning when the vote is suppressed.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's Republican dogma at this point.
Typically, the fewer voters who turn out, the more likely Republicans are to win. Yeah. So they definitely have an incentive to have the voter turnout be as low as possible. That's how Republicans win elections.
Now, it is difficult to get that across to the American public because they have this view that this is a democratic process and these people are just, these stalwarts of democracy who are just out there fighting and everything else, missing the point when they say voter fraud or voter registration or voter ID that doesn't necessarily automatically kick back in. They're doing this stuff because they realize that their advantage is increased when voter turnout is down. There's never seeming to be a consequence, even when you can show that 1.5 million people were thrown off the rolls. What was the consequence for 1.5 million people being thrown off the rolls, losing their capacity to vote in this country?
Right. It's really sad. And even, the courts sometimes are upholding, most recently they've upheld that practice. So I think that the consequences are going to have to come from the people because they're not going to come from the government or even the courts. So we need to hold our elected officials accountable. We need to run for office. We need to start new political parties. And we need to challenge that power structure, and we do that by getting involved.
Well, that moves to the second question. And why do you believe that it's such a small percentage of people that vote? And you said yourself, when you look at the thing in New York, I think it was like 30%. It might not even been that much of the people that essentially chose the person who was going to be, the main 2 candidates. Yeah. The overwhelming majority of the country, of that population, not so much. I mean, when you look at the country, same thing. I mean, Ohio isn't that much different than the rest of the country in this regard, where you have this kind of low percentage of people who tend to vote. Why do you think that's the case? Because you make a damn good point. Essentially, the only way we can change this process is for more people to be involved in the process. But more people are not involved in the process in order to change the process. Why do you think they're not involved in the political process?
I can think of 2 main reasons. The first is that people don't believe that their vote counts for some reason. So they're feeling like either their vote is a drop in the bucket, or that there's so much election fraud that their vote will not ultimately be counted. And then the other main reason to me is that people don't feel that the elected officials or the politicians really represent them or their political perspective. And I've heard so many people say, not voting is my vote, it's a protest. And if they feel like their choices are limited to two evils that they have to pick between, then a lot of times people are not going to be motivated to vote for either candidate if they feel like they're just stuck with two bad candidates.
You know, to back you up on this, I saw a thing today, they were talking about young people, and they were asking how many of them are planning to vote in the midterms. I think that number was like 20%. Like apparently you can't get people motivated to go vote, saying that Vladimir Putin is somehow attacking them. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
I find this to be somewhat amazing.
I think we really need to encourage younger people to be involved and to advocate for their own self-interest and to run for office. I think it would be great to see more millennials running for things, and that we would hopefully see a higher turnout of voters with younger people running. So I do think that it's important to offer more parties. And as a minor party candidate, I was able to get on the ballot with half of the number of signatures as the major two parties. So it was actually not easy, but it is an opportunity for people who want to run for office.
Essentially, it's not impossible as people make it seem to be. Why the Greens? Like, because, you know, brass tacks, there is a headwind in this country dealing with third parties or fourth parties or fifth parties or whatever other parties. And you have the two major parties, and they do their damnedest to try to either marginalize, or you can almost even say try to prevent. I would even argue prevent, either through the discourse that takes place, or just through, you could say, a lock on media in and of itself. Why the Greens? Why did you choose to run for the Greens as opposed to one of the other major parties?
Right. And you also see the major parties sometimes co-opting our issues. So one of the reasons that I run as a Green is because we have a great platform with progressive issues that really represent the people. Our initiatives come from the people. And I also love the 10 key values of the Green Party, which includes nonviolence, feminism, social justice, ecological wisdom, and grassroots democracy. So I really agree with the Green Party stances at a fundamental level. And I think that the 10 key values, or the values of the Green Party, are things that a lot of people can look at and say, okay, that makes sense to me. There's the ability for easy buy-in to a lot of those principles. So I feel like as a Green, because we don't accept corporate donations, we're not compromised on where we receive our funding, I'm able to actually reflect my genuinely held true beliefs as far as my political beliefs, and to reflect those in my campaign.
So that's interesting. Okay. I sat in on a meeting. I think it was at the Left Forum. This was back in, I think, 2017. And it was a Greens. It was for the Greens. And I'm sitting in a meeting, and I'm thinking that they're going to have this conversation about what the Greens are going to do, meaning this kind of takeover of the political space. And I'm in that meeting like, yes, we need something different. Yes, I'm ready. It's kind of like when I go see a singer, or you go see a performance, you want that person to do well. You don't want that person to fall off stage. Yeah, falling off stage would be a show, but ultimately it will also be a damn good show if they brought the house down. They fell off stage. This wasn't singing all that well. Now, the reason why I say that is the conversation in the room ended up with this thing of funding, like the funding mechanism of the Greens. I agree with you. You say you don't take corporate donations. How do you fund yourself then? From a standpoint of an organization, how does the Greens fund themselves?
Well,
by the way, just so I'm clear, I don't want you to take corporate donations. I think that's a good thing. And I think other candidates, just in general, I don't think corporate donations should be a part of the political process at all. Think about it. It's an investment. A business is giving a bunch of money to either the campaign, whether it's directly to the candidate or whether it's tangentially to the candidate. The candidate knows that the money is coming from a particular source. It is insane to believe that the candidate is not leaning in the direction of the source of the money. So I don't want you to think that this question is somewhat critical of the stance of not taking money. The question is more so getting into what I consider somewhat of a contradiction within the way that the Greens operate. How do you fund your organization, which I want to see grow and prosper, and I want you to see you do awesome things, without the corporate donations?
Yeah, we're working off of the principle of grassroots democracy, and we also have a somewhat decentralized campaign. This is a statewide campaign, so we do need to cover a lot of ground. We have volunteers all over Ohio doing some of their own activities. So I don't have a centralized campaign manager. We have a network of people who are working in their area around the state. And we do get a fairly decent influx of donations coming from average people. So we've been getting a lot of $50 and $100 donations. That's our about an average donation. We've received some larger ones as well. And I just love to see the people deciding that they're going to do something. And we have volunteers who are just kind of popping up around the state, deciding that they want to help and work on the campaign. And we're saying, go for it. Here are some of the tools that you need. And really giving people some autonomy around the state and how they support us.
What are No. What are some of the issues for the state of Ohio itself? Like in Virginia, we have the Dominion power thing. Sometimes Dominion power is one of the main issues that come up. And you have this weird cabal where, Dominion power gives money and then the lawmakers make decisions on Dominion power. It's an amazing arrangement that these guys have. What is the issue? What are the issues that you're pushing?
Yeah, our main issues, we have, of course, the environmental issues. So we'd like an immediate ban on fracking in Ohio and a transition to green energy, while we support small, locally owned green businesses and worker-owned co-ops. We also want to move to decriminalize not just marijuana, but also other drugs and other things that are criminalized in Ohio, and to hopefully eventually work to abolish the prison state in Ohio. So we have a problem with incarcerating our residents here in Ohio, and it has impacted the economy, it's impacted families, and it's really unfairly punished and penalized Ohioans. We also still have de facto segregated schools in Ohio because we have a school funding model that's based on property taxes. And our goal is to reallocate and refigure the budget with the local government fund so that local governments have adequate funding, so that schools will be adequately funded, and so that municipalities don't have to use the court system and traffic tickets for things like revenue raising. We want to make sure local governments are adequately funded.
That sucks. I mean, because it's an inherent contradiction in the way you go about it. It's like we're penalizing the society in order to fund the society. I mean, think about it. I need to give a traffic ticket in order to pay for my schools.
Yeah, it's really hurt our economy because so many people are taken out of the workforce. And so then we don't have qualified workers to attract employers to our state. So we do have a low unemployment rate in Ohio, but we don't have a living wage. So I do support the Fight for 15 with annual increases for cost of living and inflation. And we also just want to help provide that social safety net by having universal health care, universal pre-K, and good quality public schools from pre-K to college. So there are a lot of programs that we would like to promote in Ohio. And as far as budgetary issues, I do believe that there is adequate funding available for these, that it's really a matter of priorities. So we need to prioritize the things that are going to help Ohioans. And for instance, it costs so much money to incarcerate an individual for a day, a week, a year, that we could be putting that money towards education.
Agree. Oh, I agree. I often find that the country itself, for whatever reason, and I think this is somewhat of a sickness of the society, prioritizes this idea of force over this idea of actually trying just to prevent it. So you can say, yes, we're going to use $30,000 a year to put somebody in prison, but no, you can't say we're going to use social programs that are going to make sure people have jobs so they don't end up in prison. Like, it's the difference between the root versus the end result, when you can't necessarily it's hard to do something at the end result as opposed to trying to get to the root of the issue. I think that's what it sounds like you're saying. We can put that money into other sources as opposed to actually putting it into just the end blunt force of the law in regards to putting the boot on people.
Yeah, we have a holistic view of how we should be taking care of Ohioans and people in our society. My running mate, Brett Joseph, is he's a professor in sustainable agriculture, and he also practices permaculture.
Nice.
So the practices of permaculture can be applied to not just gardening, but they can also be applied to things like city planning and how you organize a group of people. So he has great experience with that. I think with my criminal law background, my attorney background, and his sustainable agriculture background, we really cover a lot of ground as far as urban and rural issues. And our goal is really to represent all Ohioans and to heal some of the kind of like political wounds that we have that are dividing all of us.
You know, I agree with you that it's difficult sometimes to get past political wounds from the standpoint of a Democrat and Republican, especially when people have an ironclad idea in their head of what those things are. I have a question from Joshua Renshaw. He says, if the feds won't push for a national voter holiday, would it be possible for you as governor to enact a state voter holiday?
I don't see why not. I think that sounds like a great idea. And I think that we already have had early voting. So I think that early voting is something that's important and that should continue. I think having a statewide voter holiday seems absolutely like a great idea.
You know, one of the other issues of putting people in prison is they lose their voter rights. At least in Virginia, they did. I mean, I think it's all over the states, or the world, the United States. Not to mention Nixon enacted that drug war purely just from the standpoint of, you know, locking up blacks and hippies. The idea that that thing has propagated itself to this day, when people know that, is
absolutely, it's definitely politically motivated.
The esoteric other. Now let me explain what I mean by that. I know that sounds a little weird. If you ask any lefty progressives, people who consider themselves progressives, even people who consider themselves still to be in the Democratic Party, if you showed them the Green Party platform, they'd love it. They'd love it. They'd be like, oh God, I love that. That's awesome. I like that, and that. What's the hurdle? Why haven't these people jump ship in this way to go into something that they actually want? What's the thing that stops them from making that jump to something that would be more in line with their values? Because look, if I have to push somebody, like there's this weird idea that you push somebody in office and then you push them after you put them in office. And it's like, but if I have to push that person, clearly that person is not on my agenda. Why I call progressives a politically abused spouse of the Democratic Party. Why haven't they jumped ship? Your platform and the platform of the Green Party seems to be on point with their own stated value system. Why the jump?
Well,
why the left?
I think part of that answer lies in our climate of fear-based politics. So you have people going to further and further points of like polarization politically, and always pointing at their opponent and saying, we have to make sure that he doesn't get elected. So there's this idea of voting against the worst candidate. So
what's wrong with that strategy? I mean, is there a logic to that? This idea, and again, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I hate this idea because I think this idea has gotten us, you know, to horrendous, somewhat of a hellscape scenario. But why is that wrong? Is there a logic to it? Meaning, my mom goes to the voting booth. My mom knows I voted for Jill Stein. My mom gets into the voting booth and she says, oh my God, Donald Trump is a maniac. He's going to eat babies and kick puppies. And she says, God, I don't want to vote for her, but if I don't, Trump is going to get in office. What's wrong with that line of thinking?
Well, I think that is a rational line of thinking, especially when we are dealing with a two-party system. So when there are two main choices, it's just kind of A and B. So I do understand that and agree that that's rational. But I think that we also have opportunities to build political power so that we can choose something that's in our self-interest.
Yeah.
So I do think it's really important to build political power in a way that isn't going to be just voting against the very worst option to take another bad option. We need to start saying, hey, I'm not going to settle for that. I'm not going to settle for politicians who don't represent women well, who don't represent people of color well, or the peace movement well. We need to build a party and build political power from the grassroots that is a party of the people, that actually stands for our principles and doesn't compromise because they've been bought out by corporate interests.
As a basic level of standards. Like I agree with you on this. My only slight disagreement on this, I think it's rational in the moment, but I don't necessarily think it's rational overall, which makes me think it's not rational necessarily overall or rational. What I mean by this is it moves the goal board, it moves the line. Like, so it's always this thing of let's go with concentration camps. I heard one of the lefty commentators. He said, I would vote for one concentration camp less if it was on the ballot. So if Obama said, I want 3 concentration camps, and Mitt Romney said, I want 5, I'd vote for the guy who's pushing 3 concentration camps. And it's like, but you're voting for concentration camps. And what happens when in 4 years, Obama is pushing 6 concentration camps and the Republicans pushing 10, and you say, hey, this guy's 4 concentration camps less. Look how awesome it is that he's pushing 4 concentration camps less. It's like the goal line continuously moves where your standards continuously get eroded through the process. I hate this idea of, not to mention the person you're voting for is doing stuff. Like the person it's like, I'm voting against this person. Yes, I understand you're voting against Trump, but you understand Hillary is also going to be in office doing stuff. Like I feel you on this, where it's rational in the moment. So I don't necessarily think it's insane.
It's like a short-term gain. I would consider it a short-term gain. And I do think that voters deserve to have somebody that they like and that actually represents what they want politically.
So I have 2 questions here from my audience that I'm going to intermesh. So Pet Hacker, for Trudy, where does she stand on Julian Assange? Is Julian Assange a journalist, or is Julian Assange a criminal that should be shot in the head? Where do you stand on Assange?
Yeah, I definitely have my own personal feelings on that.
Because you're a lawyer. That's even more interesting. You're a criminal lawyer.
Yes.
You've looked at the underbelly of the United States government in a way that I think many people might not necessarily have experience. And you have this guy who's speaking truth to power and is being essentially, for all intents and purposes, de facto imprisoned. Am I wrong on this? Or what's your take on this?
Well, Julian Assange was a guest speaker a year or 2 ago at the Green Party conference. And I do appreciate some of the information that he and others like him have gotten out. I think that is important, that is, to have whistleblowers, to have people expose those types of things. But I was actually very upset that there was no conversation about consent or about rape, about women's issues at the same time. And he was also a keynote speaker that I had to sit through and, see his face up, on the big screen. And I really did not appreciate that personally as a woman. Yeah.
So do you believe the charges that were put against him, you don't necessarily think it was a political witch hunt? You think it was an actual real thing, even though they've dropped it? And I'm asking, I don't know the answer to this. I know that you never asked a question you don't know the answer to.
So yes, I am a defense attorney, and I do believe in our right to due process and to be proven guilty. But I did think that, it should at least have been accompanied by a conversation on consent. Because, we're at a conference where, sometimes people get together at a conference and there's a heightened risk for date rape and sexual assault. So I think that it's something that needs to be talked about. I do think that there were allegations that were potentially credible. I'm withholding judgment on that issue, but I think that there were potentially credible allegations, and that there needed to be a conversation about that. And, you know, that isn't necessarily to say that he wasn't persecuted or targeted. I don't know that, I don't have access to that information.
That's
but
fair.
I was not really happy with it.
Let me ask you this. So should he have been extradited? So say, for instance, that they said, look, there's charges on you for the date rape thing, or, and I'm not, let's say there are charges on you in another country, and there's an arrest warrant hanging behind it from the United States. If he was apprehended for one thing, should he have been arrested and ferreted to the United States to stand charges for whatever the United States was going to bring charges up on him for?
That, I mean, that was a huge part of the debate, that people were saying, look, this is just a witch hunt. They're targeting him politically because of the information that he has made public. So I think that it's really hard to separate those issues, because, you know, we're dealing with one person. While I don't think that people should be politically targeted for speaking the truth, I also think that women need to be respected more in our society and listened to and believed when they have allegations or complaints about sexual violence.
I understand. I do understand that point.
There's not really an easy answer to that. I was definitely aware of both sides of that debate. So.
Okay, that's fair. No, that's totally fair. I guess we look at it through the lens. I look at it through the lens of this kind of U.S. influence in various countries, and I look at the pressure that the United States was applying on the various countries in order to keep that allegation up, just so Britain will have a fig leaf of, hey, well, this guy broke bail, so now we can arrest him and send him back to the United States. It's that type of stuff. Where
absolutely, and it's not uncommon for people who, you know, are involved in some type of anti-corruption activity to have child porn pop up on their, you know, on their computer, and then all of a sudden they're, you know, committing suicide, or like all these, you know, shady things happen because maybe people are being politically targeted, and so they're being dragged through the mud in some way. And that stuff absolutely does happen. That's a tactic that is used.
It sucks that trust has been lost so much in society, where it's hard to know. It's like you're in a hall of mirrors. It's like what's true is, and the sad part is both can be true. You know what I mean? You know, it's, so I feel you. Let me ask you this. So who are you running against in the race for Ohio, in the race in Ohio governor? Who's the Democrat and Republican who's on the ballot across from you?
Yeah, Mike DeWine is the Republican, and Richard Cordray is the Democrat running for governor.
Cordray is the gentleman that was in the Financial Protection Bureau, correct?
Yes.
Interesting. Now, if I remember correctly, you had a conversation with Cenk Uygur brought you on the show. Now, Cenk Uygur called it a debate. And I looked at it, I was like, why does this have to be a debate? That was my first thought.
Yeah, I thought, I went into that thinking that it was going to be like a softball interview, that they wanted to give me some time for my, you know, to talk about my race and stuff. And then he starts it off by saying, like, I agree with the positions, but I don't necessarily support this candidate.
Yeah. Like, I agree with everything that you say, but I don't support you in the least. It's like, okay, thanks for that. Thanks for that.
Well, I will say that I actually just really appreciated the opportunity to interview with him on the Young Turks, and that the questions that he was asking are actually very common questions that people ask in criticism of the Green Party, or ask why I'm running as a Green. And so they were all pretty valid questions. And I was happy that I got the opportunity to answer some of those questions.
I'm curious, when people ask you that, they say, well, Richard Cordray is deeply progressive, or however they want to call it. What do you say to that? Well, I'm curious about your response. What do you say to people who say, well, hey, aren't you splitting the vote? And why don't you just support this random Democrat who's put up, and isn't this guy deeply progressive because he ran the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? What's your response?
He's actually not as progressive as people would like to think that he is. He supports fracking, which is polluting our water in Ohio.
And you know, for first word, I hate the term progressive in this case because I think it's like a yada yada. Like I know what people are trying to get across, but I don't know what it means. It's like somebody saying I'm a feminist. Okay, I know what you're trying to say, but I don't know exactly what that means. It's kind of something like that. So it's like, can you be progressive and support fracking? Well, I don't know. Well, where's the shade? So let's say this. Let's use the term progressive because people use it. But why not Cordray? Let's say it that way. Why not Cordray?
Well, I think that we have a better choice. We have better alternatives. You know, I think that we need to have diversity in our political system. So I am able to represent a platform that is against fracking, that would like to decriminalize sex work because we have women who are victims of human trafficking.
Agreed.
Who are being criminalized, to decriminalize and legalize marijuana in Ohio. He's definitely not promoting that. In one of our candidates forums, I mentioned gun buyback programs as one potential solution to the gun issue, and he had never, he was like, oh well, I've heard maybe that works. I mean, I think that he's kind of middle of the road on a lot of issues, and he may be better than Mike DeWine on some things, but he's not the candidate who's going to really represent the people and actually listen to the people and give voice to what they want politically.
Essentially, incrementally better. He's an Obama Democrat, or a Clintonite, or whatever you want to call it. But for the most part, he's a run-of-the-mill Democrat that's running in Ohio that's sided beside a Republican. And because a Republican is usually dragging his knuckles on the ground, he has scars on his knuckles for dragging him. It's a low bar. It's like, I breathe air out of my nose. And it's like, great, you're a better guy. Look how deeply progressive he is because he breathes air.
He's pretty much going to maintain the status quo on a lot of things.
It's funny. I have an interesting question here from Joshua Renshaw about fracking. Well, but first, there's one more. Any support for Dennis Kucinich, and does his name carry any weight? That's the first question. And Joshua Renshaw wanted to know whether or not he wanted you to justify your anti-fracking position with the knowledge that A, you don't change energy consumption demands and empower exporters such as terrorist-friendly OPEC countries, and B, I think he's trying to say eliminate thousands of jobs.
Where do you want me to start?
Either one. I would love to take that one on myself. I'm gonna leave that one up to you, though. God, I hate that question. Well, no, I don't hate the question. I love the question because I think the question. Look, I think questions tend to clarify where people stand. So I love the question.
Yeah.
I think it's I guess it's the. But go ahead, answer that question. I want you to start.
Okay. Well,
I love that question.
There's a big anti-fracking movement in Ohio, and this is coming from the people. This is coming from a lot of rural landowners who are seeing the fracking companies come in on their land. They're creating a lot of noise, a lot of, they're running their trucks through their land. They're doing a lot of it without really the consent of the owners, except that they have an old land lease that maybe was signed a long time ago that they never thought was going to be acted upon. And now the fracking companies are coming in and doing this on their land. Yeah. They're also injecting poisonous material into Ohio injection wells. And right now, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources receives funding per barrel of frack waste that we take in from out of state and put in our injection wells. And that's potentially contaminating our water, poisoning our children, creating earthquakes. There were earthquakes in Youngstown for the first time.
I would say
that
earthquakes,
the things clean drinking water and our ability to live on the land is our greatest wealth. And in Ohio, we have enough fresh water and farmland that no matter what happens in the national economy, we would be able to feed all of our residents of Ohio. However, we have a very high rate of poverty and child hunger in Ohio because we're directing those resources to other places. Bottom line is that I support community rights. There are communities who have been standing up saying we want to have a community bill of rights, which means that our community can say no to fracking. That has been thwarted at the state level in the Ohio Revised Code. That's something that I think needs to be changed, that state preemption over some of the local control over the fracking issue. Also, I think that it is high time that we transition to green energy. So we need to start putting our technology and our resources in that direction.
Yeah.
That's something that can absolutely provide jobs. And there are a lot of jobs that are provided with wind and solar manufacturing. And that's something that I absolutely want to promote in Ohio as we move off of dirty energy. We also have plans to support a fund for workers, a super fund for workers who are leaving the coal industry and the fracking industry, so that we're supporting those workers, because not only are we environmentalists, but we also support workers and people. And that's something that is very important to Greens as we make connections and build coalitions with these activist groups, with workers groups. We've built coalitions with a lot of socialist groups in Ohio. So we are really trying to take into account a holistic picture that will support the rights of nature and our right to a clean environment and our right to a livable economy for Ohio workers and families.
Would it lose thousands of jobs? I mean, is it one of those things where there would be a loss of thousands of jobs in Ohio of high paying jobs if you stop supporting fracking in the state?
Not if we replace those by moving towards a green industry.
Yeah. And you know, it's like an asteroid is hitting the planet. You know what I mean? It's like you're in a situation where the scientists are telling you that the world is falling apart. At some point, there needs to be a transition. I don't understand the perpetuity. There's something that you said that I absolutely loved. When talking about places like West Virginia, I often hear, Donald Trump is like, I'm bringing back coal, I'm bringing back coal. And that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Now, understand it from a political situation. You're talking about people in West Virginia who are terrified of losing their jobs and terrified that, you expropriate all of the resources out of West Virginia in order to fuel and heat the rest of the country. But we're like the 48th poorest of the entire country. Now you're saying that you're trying to transition off of coal into solar and all this other stuff. What about our jobs? My thing was always, it is sane and rational, as rational can be for a person to care about their jobs. I don't care about the environment if you're telling me that you're going to take my job away from me and I can't support my kid. Supporting these workers in those states where we're trying to transition is an amazing thing. I love that you said that. I so love that you said that, because it's completely unfair to a worker who's worked in a coal mine for God knows how long, or worked in a coal industry, and your country says, thank you for your work, thank you for the resources of your state, now we're transitioning off of this. You guys need to start doing code or something. You guys need to start doing something else. I think it makes perfect sense in the world for the government to say, thank you for your help, we're assisting, we're going to support you guys and transition to something else. I just think it's necessary. I don't think you can get support from states like that who have this economy that's so dependent upon a particular energy source that we no longer necessarily want to use, without supporting those people in any transition period. So I love that you said that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to go a little bit anti-capitalist on you for a minute.
Do it. I am immediately I am a raging anti-capitalist.
So I would just want to point out that so often in our power structure, there's the divide and conquer tactic. So you have big corporations, and what I see is we having big corporations coming into the state of Ohio, getting big tax abatements, and they're coming in and exploiting the workers, and they're exploiting the environment in Ohio for a profit. And there's this divide and conquer mentality that there's not enough to go around, and anything that happens that benefits the environment is at the cost of workers, or vice versa. And I think that's a false dichotomy, and that it doesn't have to be that way, and that we can really promote workers and the environment. And it really is about priorities and prioritizing how we're going to run things. And I just want to prioritize small, locally owned and worker-owned businesses that are local to Ohio, that are environmentally friendly. And I think that we can be a front runner in green manufacturing. Part of it is, in addition to decriminalizing marijuana, the hemp production is a renewable resource that will help Ohio farmers and that can be used in manufacturing. Right now, we have a huge plastic problem with single-use plastics polluting our oceans and our waterways. And with hemp and other renewable plant-based sources, with corn products, we can replace a lot of those plastic products with compostable and environmentally friendly products.
No, I agree with you on this. I am in this mindset that we need to transition over. I really am. I know the argument that people make, and Josh was making the argument here. Josh, I'm gonna let you call in and we can have a back and forth on the fracking thing. Look, we have enough energy in this country from standpoint of green energy where we can pull ourselves off of fossil fuels. We don't have to be in pulling all of this energy in from other countries in this way. And if I'm not mistaken, we're almost an energy supplier at this point. From the amount of energy that we've been producing, this kind of above all hands on deck energy approach. Let me ask you this one last question, and then I'm gonna ask a final question. What's about the argument that says we need the ability to have energy that's, whereas some of the other energy sources are incidental, meaning they're not necessarily constant, like wind and solar aren't necessarily in a stable form that you can use it in a constant way, that you need to some degree amount of oil and so forth. What is that one of the reasons to have fracking in the country? Like, I guess what I'm getting at is, does Joshua have a point that undercutting fracking somehow cripples the ability for the United States to meet its energy requirements and making us less safe because it makes us more dependent on energy overseas from countries that are hostile to us and our interests?
Thanks. I hear that. I would just say that I think it's important to start moving to a transition and to start that right away, because we've already reached peak oil. So peak oil is going to, oil is going to get depleted, and the cost for extracting that oil is becoming more and more costly. So you have the tar sands in Canada. It's very, very costly. And if we poison our own water just so we can drive a car, it just doesn't really make sense. We have to have our basic needs met. And I would say that I think that with technology advances, if we put our investment there into wind and solar, that we will be able to replace a lot of our energy needs based on that it will provide green jobs. There's also biofuels, corn production, ethanol. So I think that there are many alternatives, and that we need to avoid some of the harm that fracking is causing, and start moving towards something that's more sustainable.
I agree with you. The moment that we found that methane was one of the drivers of climate change and that it was worse than carbon, and that fracking essentially leaked more methane than the other items, right off the bat, you're being told either you believe in science or not. Do you believe in science from the standpoint of saying that your world is falling apart based on the activities that you guys are doing to harness energy? It's like the moment that they say this is killing us, then it sounds a little weird to make the argument of we need to continue to do the thing that's killing us as opposed to transition to something that's not. So I hear you on that. I totally agree with you. So I'm going to ask one last question. Is there anything that I didn't ask? I think I asked about the campaign. I think I asked about the Green Party. Is there anything I didn't ask that you wish to talk about?
Well, I would like to let some of your viewers know how they can support us and how they can support our campaign. So I do have a website. It's constanceForOhio.org. And on the website, you can sign up to volunteer. You can see our issues and information about our platform, and you can donate. And we obviously need some of those donations. Donations of any amount are really appreciated and will be used for essential things like getting flyers to canvass and go door to door, to help build our website and our online presence, and to help get us around the state of Ohio. And I just want to invite people to participate, to follow us on the news. They can share our posts on Facebook and Twitter. And also, I would encourage everyone to reach out to your media, to your radio stations, your newspapers, to your TV stations, and ask for coverage of me, Constance Gadell-Newton, running for governor in Ohio, and other Green Party and minor party candidates.
I lied. I'm sorry. When you said that, I started thinking of two other questions. I want you to put your lawyer hat on for the moment. Well, two hats. First, the hat of somebody who was running a political campaign, or who was, let's say, the meta narrative of a political campaign. How on earth do you get the Green Party to break the echo chamber? That's the first point. Meaning, if you had all the resources in the world, how would you get the party itself to crack the consciousness of the public, to try to get more than two parties in the political process? That's the first question. The second one, is it possible to operate with more than two parties in the political process? They always make this point of saying this country is kind of bicameral. You can only really have two parties. Is that true? Let me leave those questions two for first, okay, and I have one more after that.
Great. So I heard an excellent suggestion recently, and it is for a ballot initiative for approval voting or ranked choice voting in Ohio. And it's possible that that may be our next project after I'm done running for governor, is to start a ballot initiative for ranked choice voting. To answer your earlier question, what I would say is how we break out of the kind of echo chamber. When I've been going door to door and talking to people at local community events, it seems like people are very receptive to our message, but a lot of people don't know that the Green Party exists.
Yeah.
So we're really just trying to get the word out. And a lot of times when we tell people about the Green Party and they've heard about it for the first time, they're really excited about it and they want to get involved. So we are still a relatively new party in Ohio. We just gained our party status 10 years ago. So the other parties have a couple hundred years on us.
Yes, they do.
So we've seen a lot of growth since 2016, since the Bernie Sanders thing happened. We've seen a lot of growth in the Green Party, and we're continuing to see growth. So we're seeing new groups in a lot of areas around Ohio. So we're established in Cincinnati, Cleveland, Toledo, and Columbus, but we're seeing groups coming up in Lima, Ohio, and Canton, Ohio, and Summit County. So these are like a lot of the smaller and rural areas. So we're really trying to cover a lot of ground and represent all Ohioans and just get our word out.
Any collaboration with Nick Brino or the Democratic Socialists of America, like some of the smaller parties, for like a coalition party?
Well, locally, we have been reaching out to a lot of different groups. So there are three main socialist groups that are active in Columbus and in Ohio. There's Socialist Alternative, the ISO, the International Socialist Organization, and DSA. And we've been attending their events and basically letting them know that we support them, and that although there is no official socialist party, we share a lot of their views. And recently, there are Greens who have even said that the Green Party is an eco-socialist party. So I think that that's an important connection to make, is that we do support a lot of the gains of socialism and welcome people from, I would say, pretty diverse political backgrounds to come into the Green Party, to contribute something to the political dialogue, and even to run candidates, from their group if they want to as Greens. We totally support that.
Now, let me put your lawyer hat on for me. I look at the political process as being somewhat ossified, meaning I'm not in this camp that believes that politics doesn't matter or that nothing can change. You can look at a historical context, even from the standpoint of Bill Clinton taking office. That was a change to some degree in the Democratic Party. So our politics in the country changes. If you look at what things were, let's say during the 70s, during the 90s, to now, there's been a significant shift in the way our political space. Hell, even just in the standpoint of, from the standpoint of 2016, the political dialogue of the things that are acceptable on the left has given magnificent latitude. Like you said, you were able to get the Greens started getting a lot of, you can say, interest. I would say it spread out on the left, like you said, socialist groups, Greens. But it still seems that there are the two major party thing is somewhat of a problem. It's somewhat of a hindrance in the way we go about our affairs. Both parties, however, are just corporations. If this was any other industry, antitrust would apply. For all intents and purposes, there's a monopoly on the political space using two corporations as that monopoly, even though people don't really consider them to be corporations. Why doesn't antitrust laws apply to the Democratic and Republican Party?
I think the answer to that lies in the power dialogue. So right now they have a lockdown on the power structure. So it may apply, but if there's no entity or organization that's powerful enough to challenge that, what's to be done about it? So I think
like a legal challenge. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Like, I understand the political space, but to some degree, the legal space has been somewhat of a check on power of the political space, especially when the political space hasn't necessarily been up to the task of checking and policing itself. Wouldn't that be a judicial issue, not necessarily a political issue at that point?
Well, potentially, but again, the judges are elected or appointed within the two-party system. So I think that you may have a novel political or a legal argument that could be brought up, but there are also still political forces that might defeat that in the courtroom as well. So that just has to be taken into account. I think that you may have a good idea or be onto something, and maybe it's worth a shot at the right moment.
I just keep thinking, I was like, you have these two political parties that are just corporations. I mean, another example, when they used to have the people on stage, I can't think of the name of the group, but the television networks weren't the main drivers of the people who used to hold the debates. The moment that they did, they started to exclude Green Party candidates from the debate stage. So, if you can't even get on the stage, how can you even get your ideas out? Like you said, people didn't even know the party existed. I find this to be somewhat of a scam in the way they go about their affairs in political space. And I keep thinking, these are just two corporations. Why do they have a monopoly like this?
It's a huge issue, yeah. People will make up all kinds of excuses why they're not going to allow minor parties or independents onto that debate stage. And a lot of it is, well, they would never have a chance to win anyway. But if we had a fair media system or fair debates, then people would be able to hear our voices equally and could be better informed so that they could choose. So it's really a vicious cycle.
So the answer, they don't want you on that debate stage because they don't want you to take away from their particular candidate. That's the honest answer.
Absolutely.
It's aggravating. It's like either it's a democracy or not.
And
either you believe in it or not.
I've even had nonprofits who maybe are kind of liberal nonprofits and prefer Democrats refuse to let me come to a candidates forum. Wow. Because, for whatever reason, some of them have stated that they don't have that due to time considerations, they can't have me as a candidate come on. So I think it's pretty clear that it's not really about how much time it's going to take. I'm actually very well practiced at staying in with like a 2-minute limit on my answers and try not to be a stage hog too much, but it's clear that they're politically motivated and that they're excluding some of the candidates because they prefer others or believe that they have, a greater chance of winning. So that's something that I definitely want to fight for and just get out in the open, that there is this discrimination and that it's really hurting the public. It's hurting the voters and it's hurting our democracy. So when I get left out of a debate, not only is it me as a candidate, but it's also my ideas that are not entering into the political discourse, that the people are actually deprived of hearing that political perspective. And it takes away from the imagination of the voter base and of the population as to what's possible politically. So it's very oppressive against the people.
No, I agree. It's like you have either you have a democratic system or not. Constance, continue to live out loud. This is awesome. I wish you the best on this particular campaign, and I really do appreciate you coming on to the soapbox to talk to our audience about your campaign in Ohio. This is Constance Gadell-Newton. For some reason, I want to say Gadwell, but it's not Gadwell, it's Gadell. Constance Gadell-Newton, candidate for the Green Party in Ohio.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed being on your show. It's been a great conversation, and thank you so much for giving me some airtime and
absolutely,
let people know.
I saw your interview, and I think you and I were playing Twitter tag at one point, and I think somebody reached out to me and said, "Hey, she wants to come on to the show," and I was like, "Yes, I want her on the show, so let's do this." So thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. You too.
All right, guys, I'm going to end this here. Joshua, you and I are going to have a debate on fracking. I welcome that debate. It's going to have to be on the day when my powers are a little bit higher, but I totally welcome that debate. And I think I've heard you make the case before, and I appreciate your question. I hope she answered it, or at the very least, I hope she answered it in a sufficient way that you required. So I want to end this here, guys. If you guys enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like subscribe. You guys can always support the Patreon. Thanks, everyone. And we are